Okay, so you know who your stakeholders are. You have spent the time to plan and prepare for the meeting. Now it's time to do it. This is where having the conversation or the meeting, where it comes down to making sure that you are going to interact well with whoever the stakeholder is that you're interviewing or that you are having the conversation with. First off, we want to talk a little bit about building rapport. We're all human. And, well, most of us are. I do include myself in that group. Because of that, we have some things that we share in common. I mean, we were all children once. We all grew up. We have a lot of history, and depending upon what age we're at, there's a less or more or less history to deal with. Building rapport is about small talk. It's just about chatting about things that are not important, definitely avoiding topics that could be in any way, shape, or form controversial. In today's day and age, I would highly recommend against any political conversations unless you know the individual very well, or you might just set off a firestorm that you'll never be able to control. But being able to have small talk is a way of making the human connection. It is allowing people to recognize, hey, we're just people here. Let's just talk about what it is you want, what it is I can give you, and let's not make this an adversarial or a confrontational kind of thing. Let's just chat. One recommendation, by the way, because of the nature of people, there's only one very safe topic you can talk about when it comes to small talk, and that is the weather. No one can do anything about it. We're all stuck with whatever we've got, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. You can always talk about that if you have no other topic available. If you happen to know the individual and you know some of their stance on issues or some of their favorite topics, you might go with that. Small talk is really about just being casual, setting the stage, making sure that everybody's comfortable before you get started. Once you do get started, you're having a conversation or a meeting with a goal. You're trying to achieve something. You want to come out of this meeting with a better understanding of the user story, the epic, the requirement, whatever it is, the feature than you had coming in. In order to achieve that, you need to stay on topic. Staying on topic is a kind of a challenging thing because being human beings, we quite often get sidetracked. I don't know about all of you, but I have ADD. And because of that, I can easily get wandering off onto a topic that's fascinating, but it's not getting us any closer to achieving our objective. This is where having that objective of the meeting or the conversation in writing and putting that into an email when you invite them to the email, or even bringing it up. And I've seen some people that would like to have it put on a flip chart so that they can have it on the wall or hanging on the wall or visible during the entire meeting, so that at any time you start to get off on one of those side topics that are so interesting, you can always point to that agenda or to that objective and say, well, you know, this is fascinating. We can have this conversation. I'd love to hear more about your side of it. Maybe we have time after work and go out and have a beer or something. But right now, we do need to get this conversation to achieve our objective as is written up here. Another part of it is nonverbal communication. And nonverbal communication is a field of study in and of itself. We're going to talk a little bit more about that one in a couple of minutes. But when you're having a conversation, when you're having a meeting, it's not just about paying attention to what the person says or doesn't say. It's just as much about paying attention to their nonverbal communication. And remember one thing, nonverbal communication is a two-way street, meaning you're sending signals to them just as much as they're sending signals to you. Basically, during the meeting, you want to try to minimize misunderstandings. Your goal is getting a common understanding of what the user story, the feature, whatever it is you're talking about, is all about. You want to make sure at any point in time, if you start to get the feeling that they're saying something that doesn't quite jive with what you are thinking or feeling, bring it up, talk about it, bring it out. It doesn't do you any good to just ignore it and walk off saying, well, I know that sounded a little weird, but I'm going to go with what I think. Because ultimately, if it ends up that what you thought and what he or she thought is different, you're going to deliver the wrong solution. We're going to talk also a little bit about a thing called listening techniques. These are ways of trying to make sure that I am hearing what you're saying, hearing what you're not saying. So it goes beyond verbal communication and nonverbal communication, and as far as human communication is concerned. Finally, there are some people with whom I have instant rapport. There are other people with whom I can barely stand to be in the same room, let's put it that way. And recognizing the difference, recognizing the fact that there are people that are what I would call difficult people. They may not be difficult people at all, but for me they're difficult because of my nature, because of my personality, whatever. These are people that I'm going to have to figure out better ways of dealing with. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that as well. Now, there's one of the recommendations when you're having a conversation trying to get to requirements or trying to get to user stories, epics, features, etc. And that is people recommend ask open-ended questions. A conversation, or for that matter, a meeting, is not going to always be just ask an open-ended question, let them talk forever, and then close the meeting. Actually, people that are good at interviewing, at having requirements gathering conversations or user story conversations, are people that understand the difference between open and closed-ended questions and know when to use each. If you want to get them started talking and you want to have a lot of information, you ask an open-ended question. In trying to make sure that you understand what they say, that's where closed-ended questions can come in very handy. So you're actually confirming certain aspects or certain points that they made and making sure that they agree with that. That would be a perfect time for a closed-ended question. Not just enough to say, oh, it's always going to be open-ended. It's knowing the difference and knowing when to use which. Final word of advice, to thine own self be true. Basically, just be yourself. Remember, you are somebody, you're there for a reason, you have a goal, you have an objective, you're trying to understand what the other person wants. You are the one that is actually in control of this meeting or of this conversation, and you should be the one that is directing them because they don't really know what you need. You're the one that knows what you need, and so you're the one that has to be in control, and you have to feel comfortable. One of the best ways to feel comfortable is to be yourself. Whoever you are, just your natural being, just try to make sure that it's obviously not offending anybody or anything like that, but the closer you're able to be yourself, the more successful your meetings are going to be. When you're having this conversation, we do have to realize that people are people. Everybody is very willing, and the majority of people at any rate are very willing to work with you to achieve a goal. You're not having an antagonistic meeting where you're trying to convince somebody that is vehemently opposed to your application about the value of it. That might be a slightly different case, but the majority of people are going to be supporting you. They're going to want to have your application succeed, especially if it's an application that affects the success of the company, of the business. Having said that, it's very easy to get off topic. So making sure that you're maintaining the focus throughout the meeting, one of the ways of doing that is by having a list of your questions in front of you. So that as they start to talk, if you're asking a question and they're answering a different question, you can keep track of that. That's fine. That's still focus. That's still going on the direction of your meeting. But if they're asking or talking about something that is so far afield that it really has nothing to do with your meeting, that's where you might want to try to drag them back or try to nudge them back, if you will, into the purpose of the meeting by going back to your objective or by referring to your question file and saying something like, yeah, it's fascinating, great. I'd love to talk more about it, but I have a bunch of other questions. If we could get to these first, then maybe we'll have time to chat about that. Being humans means that I can sense whether or not you're interested at all in what I am saying, what I'm asking. And that's, again, a two-way street. If you are interested, if you're not interested in what the other person is giving you, they will sense it. And if they're not interested in working with you, you will sense it. Really, it's all about being genuinely interested in what the other person is saying. There's some people that have a natural talent for that. They are curious by nature, and it doesn't really matter what the topic is. When they get into that topic and they're talking to somebody who knows more about it than they do, their interest is sparked, and they're going to show that. That comes across very clearly. The better you are, not at feigning interest, but being genuinely interested. Now, there's a really good TED Talk that I was watching a while back regarding body language and how it affects our minds. We know that our mood affects our body language. That's a given. That's something everybody has always known. Well, some of the recent studies show that you can actually put yourself into a specific mood by assuming the body posture or the body language of that mood. If you're going into a meeting where you want to be in charge, you want to make sure that you are acknowledged, that you're in authority, one of the things that you might want to do is make yourself really big before the meeting. Studies show if you can make a very powerful pose for 2 minutes, it's actually going to cause the hormones in your body to start to build up to where you become a much more aggressive, a much more in charge kind of a person. There's a whole lot we can learn about that aspect of it in preparing for a meeting, especially one that might be a little bit, let's say, less than conversational and more adversarial. Being genuinely interested in what the other person has to say, knowing that they are people, is a big part of it. The other part of it is everybody loves to have fun. You know, if they have a topic, they're into golf like I am. then that'd be a topic we could talk about. And that's where you have to be aware that you don't get so far afield that you spend the entire hour or however long you're having the meeting talking about that, because it's such a fascinating topic. But making sure that while you're going along, they're enjoying it, you're enjoying it, and the more both of you are enjoying the meeting, the more productive it's going to be. Humor is a great tool if it's used appropriately. Obviously, it has to be politically correct, it has to be sensitive, things like that. But bringing in a small joke or telling a story on yourself, personally, I think that there's no safer way to bring in humor than to tell something that's silly about yourself, something you did wrong, or something of that nature. As long as you can bring it in as a self-deprecating kind of a way, it's non-offensive. If you start to bring in jokes about other races or other genders or something like that, you're at high risk of getting blown out of the water, meaning you're going to set this whole meeting off on the wrong foot. I highly recommend using humor judiciously and making sure that both parties are having fun as you're going through the process of conducting this interview or having the conversation.